Hey guys, we're back. Today it's the LCA Ireland versus LCA Denmark part 2, where we are going to discuss where do asset owners, developers and clients begin? What questions are they currently asking, and how do they begin their journey? And hopefully we can solve a lot of that today within this part 2 session. We're going to jump to the final one, which is where do asset owners, developers, and clients go from here? How did they start their journey on LCA? We know in Denmark that the process is in place. Generally, it's led by architects and engineers. The LCA, I think there's a challenge there slightly because LCA is strategic, like cost is strategic. You set a budget and you manage your development in the budget. I think. I'm biased, but I think there's a place for quantity surveyors, cost, carbon, QSs to help the architects and engineers in Denmark.
Definitely doing value engineering for strategitic purpose to set out a carbon path, a decarbonizing path makes sense for QSs to do.
I think that's probably missing in the delivery to date with the architects and engineers. No disrespect to you guys, of course. It's just bringing different specialization into the team environment might create a different solution possibilities.
Yeah, definitely.
And what about the developers then? Like Archie, I know you're speaking to quite a lot in Ireland at the moment. And always the question seems to be like, where do we begin? They have their overarching ESG strategy, but they often don't know how to implement that strategy on a technical deliverable level down on the project.
Yeah, well, what we're seeing is that, for some developers or funds, they have very good ambitions. They're very clearly written documents that set out their commitments to carbon and wider sustainability kind of measures like biodiversity and circular economy. But it becomes very difficult to operationalize that. And I think that the problem is that, the financial world and the construction and development world use very different languages. And there is really a need for somebody to, look at that gap, look at that how do you convert those ambitions, those sustainability goals, those commitments, how do you turn them into action? And that's really where you have to do it through the lens of carbon, really. That carbon becomes the nexus for everything else. It's interconnected with everything you do. But a good starting point really is just to get people around the table and just say, what does our future product look like? What does house that we're going to deliver in 2028 look like? And start bringing people to the table. So the way that we've done that before is, to have a conversation around strategy and then try and convert that into clear goals for carbon and for water use and for energy use, renewables, etc. And then try and put a number on that. And once you start to put a cost on it, then it starts to feed back up to the top-down strategy. And they say, well, we didn't realize it would cost that much, or there are certain measures there which they're really a no-brainer because they're coming back fairly cost neutral. So there's a constant kind of feedback loop between strategy and implementation, and it's often communicated through the lens of cost because we can talk about, you're building, you set a target for an 800 kilogram carbon dioxide building, but it's coming back at 1200, and that doesn't mean anything to people. But if you say, look, we've checked your carbon ambitions and the buildings that you're building today are 50% above that, and in order to bring that back, you want to raise your budget by 8%. That's really where the challenge is. But like the starting point, it's really quite simple. It's like Nike say, just do it. The thing is, just start getting the numbers together and just understand where the starting line is. You don't have to be the best in the world, and take those wins. Like in year one, if you actually get a clear picture of what your current product's carbon footprint is, and where are the gaps? Are you relying on the design team to do all the work on carbon in their individual silos, or have you passed it across to the cost consultant, or do you have a sustainability champion, that straddles both worlds, that they're taking the strategic and helping to operationalize that?
But for developers, I'll jokingly say, just pick up the bat phone and ring KOSMOS, and we'll come to the table and we'll have this discussion. But of course, it's much broader than that, because LCA and sustainability as a whole, it involves everybody. It's not just the architect or the engineer. It's not just the cost manager, quantity surveyor. It's not just the client. It's actually everybody sitting down and talking about what the process from inception of a project right through to project handover. That includes what's the procurement strategy, how are we going to procure carbon from the marketplace, and what do I mean by that? Our contractor, how are they going to price carbon? What's the structure around how they're going to price carbon or LCA for us as within our project, the same way as they price cost. So I think that there's a practicality here to how we implement LCA on projects underneath the strategic aspect of it, right? So underneath the ESG requirements of the business as a whole, there's a practicality here which I believe that the cost manager comes with it. The same with the economy and the cost management. There's a practicality to that as well. We set a target, we set a budget, we then manage with the team developing a design towards that target, towards that budget. Whether it's cost or carbon, doesn't really matter. They're the same thing now. And then we procure the project from the marketplace from a cost, but now also from a carbon perspective. So they run simultaneously, side by side. Processes in at least in my opinion. I'd like to hear from people out there, of course, if they have a different opinion to this, then comment on below or get in contact with us, drop us a mail. But in my opinion, they're a simultaneous process, but also identical in nature. Quantum, unit price for cost, unit price for carbon. We're setting a budget, then we're estimating at each of the design gateways against that budget. Are we on target? We're managing change management. Change management now is not just from a cost impact perspective, plus or minus, it's now from a carbon impact as well. So all we're doing is we're taking our traditional cost management approach and we're just managing carbon in the same way. At least maybe it's my simplistic view. I don't know what you guys think.
I think there are kind of two approaches to it. You can do documentation on LCA, or on carbon emissions, or you can use it as a design parameter. The same thing goes for cost, I guess. That is what QSs are for. Not just documenting what did it cost, but how do we design this building
within those parameters?
Exactly.
I think that's absolutely where the value add is, bringing us into the team and other cost manager, quantity surveyors out there. That's where we'll create the value, is how do we deliver a project within our parameters, not how do we just report on it. This is where your project is.
Exactly.
It's 20%, 30%. As you mentioned, Archie, it's 50% above what your target is. Oh, now what do we do? Like, where do we go from here, type of thing, for our developer or our clients? So I think maybe our interaction and our engagement on projects is going to shift now, because rather than traditional quantity surveying services being that reporting element, we now need to be integrated in the project team in order for the developers to get kind of quote unquote real-time information as the project is developing, so that we are designing to those targets, both cost and carbon. We're reporting on those targets. We're in control of that project development. And I don't mean we're in control. I mean us as the entire team, designers, architects, engineers, project managers, cost managers, health and safety, sustainability specialists. We're all in control together as we develop that project towards the targets that we've outlined. But I'm not sure what's your opinion, Roger. Like, will developers, is it a bold statement to say, like, in order to control carbon or to set your benchmark and your targets, you need to kind of rethink how you deliver your project?
The industry has a certain amount of resistance to it, but perhaps the best way forward is if you see like a trend towards creating a version of asset management where essentially there is someone either within your organization, or just like you have like an outside accountant, you would have a small firm of asset managers. So if you were somebody who regularly produces hotels or schools or whatever it is that you produce a lot of, that you have a built asset manager. The point that everything else plugs into in what Archie referred to, this existing siloed system where like the designer comes in at this fixed stage and somebody else comes at this point. The way things are in history up to now, there's nothing for them to really plug into that allows you to generate this nice level of consistency where you can get, say, your 10, 15-year plan for your building, whether it's on the CapEx side, the OpEx side, that there's something to always plug into instead of just this relay race where things can get missed or dropped. I think it's one of those things where you talk about risks and opportunities, that if that asset manager class is able to formalize in the industry, that it would solve a lot of those issues.
But Archie, we're having a bit of a challenge at the moment in terms of, what's the cost? And we're going to talk about cost of carbon later, but it's not cost of carbon. Like, what's the cost of the service? And then do clients, do they see a value in that service? We in a session we did a while back with John from Castell, we talked about that race to zero, that race to the bottom in terms of price. The reality is, in order for projects to succeed, clients are really going to have to look at where value is being created. And I always argue that value is created at the front end of projects, because it's the moment in time where you can make decisions cheaply. But a lot of the time we see it that specialists are brought in to the project too late, as Roger says. Is that a challenge you're coming across in the conversations you're having?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing it with the public sector now that, the state is imploring them to be leaders and exemplar. And their projects are supposed to, go from projects that would have been very risk averse and use very heavy carbon intensive materials for robustness reasons, for good reason. They're asking them to leapfrog over the private sector and take a leadership role. And that's extremely challenging, because it means they have to retool all of their internal processes, all of their established supply chains, and all of their, materials submittal rules that they've put in place. So it's a complete behavioral change. So you have to manage that, and that's one role, So before you get down to substituting materials or looking for very innovative products, you have to first manage, your own design process, your own process of giving instructions to designers. And really, I suppose the most fundamental change is, in order to have impact, you need to front end a lot of this. So if projects have a 6 or 7 year gestation period, what happens in that pipeline? Do you only apply decarbonisation to the projects that are now at funding stage, or do you go right back to do you try and a project that's coming to site in a month's time?
So there's a reorganization and restructuring here, Archie, of how traditional clients and developers approach their project now, and there's a bit of a shift going to happen. I have an example of what that means. I think LCA we're going to need to drive more granularity in our design earlier in order to be able to calculate, maybe not initially, but at least now in Denmark we're going to have to, because the low-hanging fruit, the concretes, the steels, we've already grabbed those. We already understand those. The next ones is the services, the installation, and our completions and finishes. They're the next layer. And we need to get granularity. So like traditionally in Denmark, a bill of quantities isn't used. It's a Tilbudsliste. It's not as detailed as we would know a bill of quantities to be coming from Ireland, for example. But suddenly we're now needing that level of granularity, because you need to be able to get the quantities to be able to calculate the carbon. So we're becoming more, that detail requirement's becoming more and more. And we're missing that skill set in the industry at the moment. At least in Denmark, I believe we are. That's where we come in, of course. That's what we can help you guys with. But in Ireland, I think we're going to go back to the traditional bill of quantities, and we're going to pull forward into the design stage more cost estimates rather than just cost planning or rough order magnitude estimates. We're going to become more accurate in our estimating from a cost perspective, because we're going to need the information for carbon anyway to become more accurate in our carbon. Not in the initial period, but like in Denmark, in a number of years' time, where the low-hanging fruits now have all been collected, we now need to go to the next layer of the tree.
Yeah, and look, it's the right information at the right time, from the right people. And for example, like on some buildings, 60% of the embodied carbon comes from, maybe 10% of the line items. So, it becomes a matter of timing. So at an early design stage, you may not need to have information on your finishes or your landscape, but it may be appropriate to kind of front end some of the design on the fabric and the cladding. So if you have curtain walling or you have rain screen, you may want to look at that earlier than might otherwise be the case. When it comes to some items like your M&E, it becomes very difficult to design that early on. So there is a challenge with the timeliness of that information. But I suppose where you need to be consistent is, when you ask for that information. So, if we're on a project, of course, we're asking about the concrete and the steel, but we're also looking at roofing materials because of their proportionate impact. We're looking at things like the aluminium in the curtain walling and the glass in the curtain walling, because you can have a fundamental, difference between a glass that comes from one European country versus another. And if you're using national assumptions, you might find that you're using national assumptions for glazing, for aluminium, for steel, for concrete. They may all underestimate, and cumulatively you may find that you're giving an answer, you're giving a report, decisions are being made on that report, but because of the software you've used, that report has underestimated by 30%, and it means that when the contractor buys that tender and they go to market, they may come back with vastly different figures, and somebody has to pay for that. So automatically your project is starting in a very difficult position.
And you could argue that it's the same principle for cost. So using your standard softwares for LCA calculation is like using a price book for your cost calculation. As a professional cost manager in QS, you don't use a price book. You're basing it on up-to-date tender returns, your price data that you have internally in your organization, and the price book just becomes a check. So I do believe that we are getting, at the moment, we're getting the right information at the right time. Prior to planning in Ireland, we understand the superstructure, we understand the building, we understand the facade solution, we understand the roofing solution. We can calculate quite accurately the cost. We can also calculate quite accurately the carbon at that stage. I don't think that we need to pull forward much more information in order to become more accurate right now. You mentioned the MEP, for example. We're never going to have a detailed design MEP at a concept design or dispositions Fosle. We will never have it because we won't have the building concept. It's impossible. Yeah. Design is an evolution, and we can't pull forward what is designed at the end to the beginning. Impossible. Like building the roof before your foundations. But what we have right now at the moment is enough information for a certain level of accuracy. From a cost perspective, it is what it is. Our traditionally our design, our projects are in this manner. And I would say that from a carbon perspective, it's the same thing. The volumetric is where the real impact is. That we have all that information extremely early, not down to the EPD, but the EPD is not, in my opinion, it's not very relevant at concept design. EPD, concept design, you're setting a budget, you're setting a target. You're not saying that it's exactly this material type. You're saying, I think it's going to be, in general, this material type. I do believe that we need to kind of brush away the idea of complete and utter accuracy at the beginning. We are setting a budget, and developers and clients like the cost budget. It's a target that you're going to have to manage your project towards, within and under, if you can. The same for your carbon. Your carbon's it's a budget, it's a target, and you need to manage your project. And as the evolution of the project develops, you'll then be qualifying the budget you set for your MEP, your ventilation system, X CO2 per square meter, and going, actually, and now that we have the product and materials, we can get more accurate on that before we go to the marketplace. At least in my simplistic view, that's the process for us and the process for the developer clients as well. And if they find that difficult really kind of to understand, I think it's worth the conversation with us at least,
What seems to be interesting in our discussions with some of the contractors, and some of them who've built data centers in Denmark and Holland, is that they have an understanding that, if you're going to come back with a solution that's high in one area of carbon, well, you then have to trade that off by reducing it in another. And they're familiar with some of the tools that are used to justify that. So they will know that carbon actually is currency. So you can actually set, an internal carbon price. You can say, well, by the time this building is finished, carbon won't be 58 euros a tonne. It'll be, 135 per tonne. And they're able to then say, well, this solution has a better carbon abatement return when we look at it. So they can give it back to you in financial metrics and say, look, the net present value of changing from this refrigerant to another refrigerant, it might seem like a capital cost, but there's actually a return on investment here, which means that it's a good decision.
I'd say there's the same principle as indexation that you apply to cost. You'll have to apply an indexation to carbon as well for the future. It's not going to be the same metric that we're using today that we'll be using in 4 or 5 years' time.
Yeah, and look, there's a time value to carbon as well. That if you put off, it's the same for retrofit. If you put off reducing your demand for 10 or 15 years, it is going to be more expensive to do that. You'll probably also have to count the embodied carbon of your refurbishment materials. But also you'll be fighting for skill sets that will be very much in demand, so the cost will go up. So there is an opportune time in which to do decarbonisation. So, we talk about cost opportunities in terms of what's your payback, what's your rate of return on different investment decisions and different solutions, but also when is the right time to do it? What's the right sequence? We would see clients that they do all the easy wins. They cover the roof in PV. They have a strategy that starts to work early doors, but they have locked in their carbon solutions. And that building, when it strands in 15 years' time, there aren't many opportunities left to further decarbonise that building.
I think from that perspective, I would say that there's a lot to happen. But unfortunately, we're out of time today in this session. But we're going to come back to this in the future for sure. Thanks, guys, for your time. Much appreciated. Thanks very much for listening. There's a LinkedIn link below in the show notes. We would love to connect with you.
We hope you enjoyed it and have you with us in the next one. Thank you very much.